So I have been squatting wrong for the past 5 to 6 years, and in today's video I want to tell the story on how I got to that point, but I also want to talk about how I fixed that squat. Now, this is not an in-depth squat tutorial. For that I will refer to guys like Alan Thrall, Ed Cohn, Omar Isov, Silent Mike. All these guys, they all have great in-depth tutorials about how to fix the squat. Although I've watched almost all of them, it still didn't click with me. And that is not because the information wasn't correct, but my perception of that information was false. And today's video I want to give you my perspective on the squat, and maybe you can learn some things. In October of 2015, I moved to South Africa for a half year to work at the University of Cape Town. And there I had the opportunity to train at the gym, and that really got me started into lifting with a barbell and actually squatting for reps and sets. Back at that time, when I started squatting, I was very scared to use my knees. I always felt like I had weak knees, and I was afraid to really put pressure on my quadriceps and to actually use my knees. And little did I know that actually training your legs, actually using your quadriceps strengthens your knees to a certain extent. What I did was I started to develop a very strong hip hinge. So I used my hips to go deeper into the squat, but just like I went back. I did almost like a deadlift when I was squatting. And the problem with that is it is very difficult to stay upright with your torso if you're squatting that way. But in March 2016, I got back to Belgium, and that was also the first time I got a full-time job. So I was able to pay for a gym membership, which I did. We trained 3 times a week and we did squats every single training session. I still continued doing the habit of pushing my butt back when I was squatting. So I was really anxious to put pressure on my knees, and I was really scared of doing that, so I avoided that at all costs. Also, I believed in the fact that your knees shouldn't go past your toes, otherwise you would blow your knees out, so I kept away from that as well. During that period, what I developed was a very strong pain around my sacrum. Mainly because when you're bending forward like that, you put a lot of stress on the lower back and the connection and the part where your lower back meets your hip. So that was under constant pressure when I was squatting. I find a relief for that eventually by using a reverse hyper, and that is also why I built the reverse hyper as a first piece of equipment in my home gym. And that really put off the pressure, but that really didn't take away the cause of my sacrum pain. By the time it was April 2018, we stopped our gym membership and we went straight into a home gym training. And that is also where I got my PR, my longed for PR of 140 kilos with the squat. And I was so happy because that is really the intermediate standard of YouTube for powerlifting, really. The technique wasn't there, and I really hated squatting. After I got that PR, I was like, yeah, let's stop doing squats. I have my goal. Let's move on. So a couple of years passed, and at the end of 2020, my buddy Toshiro came to the home gym because he typically trains at a regular gym, but because they were all closed, and they actually still are, he wanted to test his squat PR here in the home gym, and he hit 175 kilos for a very solid rep. I was just blown away, not by the fact that he could lift that much weight, but by his technique. His technique was as good doing 175 as he were to do 100, as he were to do 60 kilos. It was just amazing, and I wanted to have that as well. So by the end of 2020, I started to do squats again. And I thought always, like, I can't keep myself upright when I'm doing a squat. So instead of changing the hip hinge, what I did was I started doing low bar squats. And for 2-3 months I was really struggling. I couldn't find the technique, always something that was hurting, but I didn't really know how to correct that until about a month or a month and a half ago, when it really started to click and I really started to feel that my technique was getting better. Now, here are the things that I did to actually better my technique. So, for one, it's not about your knee traveling over your toes or not. That is not important. The most important thing is that your knee travels in the same direction as your toes are pointing. I already knew that to some extent, but I never really fully accepted that. So that is really what I try to focus on, and I try not to be scared of letting my knee travel past my toes, because then I would get more quad activation and then my quads would get stronger, and at the same time my knee joint would get stronger. Now, that being said, what I also did was I watched a lot of videos of Squat University, and he talked about how you should imagine your foot to be a triangle, going from your big toe to your small toe to your heel. And by imagining that and imagining to have equal pressure across the 3 points, you're going to be a lot more stable in your squat. Now, as I look back to my squat technique, what I typically did was I put a lot of pressure on my heels and not as much from my big toe. So that was something that I had to fix. And I had to fix this at the start of the squat. So now I went back to high bar, and my starting position for the squat was a little bit more leaned forward, where I really felt that the pressure was divided evenly across my complete foot. And that way, if I try to remember that feeling throughout the whole squat, I was going to be on a very good path. By doing so, I was already a little bit more forward. Now, in order to really protect my back, I also had to learn how to brace properly, because I knew you had to have core activation, but when I activated my core, I also contracted my glutes as hard as possible. And by doing so, you put a lot of strain on your glutes, and if you then try to go into a squat with contracted glutes, that's like working against yourself. And by doing so, I also pulled on my lower back, so that was not okay. So I had to find a way to actually use my inner core to be stable without activating my glutes too much at the starting position of the squat. So what I did was I tried to imagine that I activated my pelvic floor. So by actually using that, you're allowing your glutes to relax, and you have some place to go when you go down into the squat. Whereas if your glutes are contracted, they form a barrier, so you can't really go into the squat. And if you have to push through that, you're going to pull on other muscles like the lower back, which I did. So I learned to really brace myself, and by going down in the squat, everything felt comfortable. And then going back up again, what I imagined was to, instead of holding my breath going up, I tried to really push some air out, like not, but more like, and at the same time contracting my core, and that felt amazing going through the squat. Another thing that I always knew about, but I never really tried to implement, was to open your taint. That is something that Ed Cohn talks a lot about, and that really allows you to open up your hips so that your torso can stay upright, so that you can really sink into the squat straight down. So that was also something that I didn't do. Like, as I mentioned before, I was hip hinging, so I was leaning forward. While if you look at Toshiro squat, and if you look at guys who squat good, they stay upright and they go down into their squat. They're not sinking back and they're not falling forward. So I had to find a way to do that. And by opening up my taint and by making some room in my hips, I was able to keep upright and let my complete body go down into the squat and push back up again. So those are really the main things that help me get a better squat. I'm nowhere near perfection, I'm nowhere near a good squat, but those are the points that I'm now constantly working on, and I feel that I'm getting better and getting stronger, and that I'm not compromising other muscles in order to do a squat. And I now hope that you have a clear idea that it's not because you follow a tutorial that you're doing everything correctly. You really need to find a coach, or you need to coach yourself by filming and by really looking at it from an outside view. It's not going to be easy, especially if you're on your own. It's going to be very tedious and it's going to be frustrating, especially if you're stuck and you don't know what to change about your technique, but it still feels off. But by persevering and by pushing through, you're going to find a way to enjoy your squat and to squat for longevity, instead of just one exercise that you want to hit a max on and then just never see it again. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope you liked this video. Leave a comment down below to talk about your squat, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace!